If you want to see more targets, here's some of the best settings I have found after spending hours testing different situations at realistic ranges while comparing the settings side by side to find the best settings. I will show you exactly what each setting visually changes, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what the best settings are, and more importantly, you'll have the information to mix and match to your own personal preference. First, look at the muzzle flash from this to this. The change is the particle setting from low to high. Low to medium, there isn't much of a difference, but on high, it's significantly more noticeable, and on epic, there isn't much of a difference from high. So, if you're struggling to see the enemy, I recommend putting this setting on high. Interestingly enough, I couldn't see any strong difference from low to epic at 50 meters. Also, in my 6,000 hours of playing squad, most of my combat is within 200 meters, so my setting recommendations are going to be what I will benefit from most of the time, not the rare situational moments. And that's why I test at multiple different ranges and not just 50 meters. But the next most important tip is to subscribe so you don't miss out on more tips videos like this. For FOV, be very careful as some weapons are affected a lot, and even going from 90 FOV to 100 FOV can make targets much harder to see, so it's up to you. I personally play on 90 FOV in squad to avoid making targets harder to see and to avoid the headache of constantly adjusting it depending on what weapon I'm using, but it's personal preference and it does have its pros and cons, so it's ultimately up to you. For shadows, there's no major difference that I could see. If your target is in the shadows, there's no magical setting to make them easier to spot. I do think there's a little bit of difference from low to medium and medium to high, mostly to do with shadows from foliage, not from shadows from objects. But there's an issue that you need to be aware of. Look at this shadow on the wall. As I'm moving, there's a very distracting eye-catching render line as I get close to the shadow. Notice how on medium settings, that is significantly less noticeable. Now, you may be thinking, okay, I don't care about that. Well, in squad, spotting movement is a big deal, and your eyes will naturally look towards the slightest bit of movement. So, as you're moving through a tree line, and you have lots of distracting shadow movement, that will make it much harder to spot real enemy movement, as you're wasting your time looking at movement that isn't targets. So, I recommend medium, as you basically get the same level of darkness, but with the less distracting eye-catching render lines. However, I did run into another issue. So far, I've only experienced on one map. On medium shadows, it causes this crazy flicker effect. If you experience this, just switch shadows to low and the flickering disappears. Hopefully this gets fixed soon, but for now this is the easy way to solve this. Global illumination basically makes some areas more darker and some areas more brighter, but I don't think the pros outweigh the cons, as the dark areas seem to be more common and more extreme, so I slap it on low and save some FPS. For textures, I couldn't find any advantage from low to epic. I was also surprised by how little difference there is on all of them, but there are some assets in squad that can make a clear difference. Look at the road markings, for example. Here's low, medium, high, epic. So if you have some FPS to spare and you want your game to look nicer, medium looks like a good trade-off. I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but with no anti-aliasing, these days on squad you get a lot of static noise, especially in foliage, and even with FXAA on max, you can still see a lot of that static noise. That will just make your eyes work twice as hard to see targets, and for that reason, and also for FPS gains, is why I use an upscaler for squad. That removes that static noise and gains me an extra 20 to 30 FPS, which may not sound like a lot, but it keeps me just above in that smooth, enjoyable experience zone. I personally use NVIDIA Balanced. The AMD upscaler, both on balance and on quality, made the foliage just a little bit more harder to see through. It's subtle, but there's a difference. Once again, I hope you can see this, but use whatever you like. It depends on your specs, your personal taste, and it does have its pros and cons. And ideally, we wouldn't need to use an upscaler at all. Side note, FrameGen tanked my FPS when using an upscaler, and I also didn't see much FPS gains when I was using the FrameGen without an upscaler. So personally, I don't use it. View distance on low makes the foliage a little bit thinner. Also, I couldn't find any meaningful disadvantage on low. The ground and rocks still render just as well, even at 200 meters. The only thing that I could find is at 200 meters on low, you can't see if players are aiming, but on high you can. So I'm going to use low and spend that FPS on more important settings. Once again, medium looks like the biggest change with this setting. Post-processing, I personally leave on low. Motion blur will just make your screen more blurrier and harder to see enemies. Tone mapper sharpening will make your screen sharper, but if you're using any form of upscaler, they normally have their own upscaling sharpen tool anyway, so it's probably best to use that. Shaders, the only thing I can see them change is the water, clouds, and ground textures. So I'm going to put it on low and save some sweet FPS. And for those who are wondering, wait a minute, if it changes the clouds, does that not change the shadows? And for the life of me, I could not find any proof of that. So I'm just going to slap it on low. Water setting has caused bugs and frame rate issues in the past, so I would recommend putting it on low. If you're playing on a water map and you want some nice looking water, I don't see much difference between low, medium, or high, but simulation does have a clear difference. For camo netting, I couldn't find any settings that will help you see through it within 200 meters. Scope resolution is another personal preference type of thing. It depends on what resolution you play on and if you can afford the FPS. I personally play on 100 to save some FPS. Side note, if you have any issues with like flickering scopes or like weird scope bugs, try scope update rate unlimited or like 120 or something like that. That worked for me. Once again, don't shoot the messenger. Window mode, once again, it's personal preference. I think in theory, full screen is meant to be best for performance and latency, but I personally play on borderless for easy tabbing out. For coloring, you can only change it like plus 0.1 or minus 0.1, so there's not much difference. But anyway, if you're wondering, here's default 1.0, brightness 1.10. There's a very slight difference in the shadows, so I use it. I don't use contrast 1.10, as that will make it darker areas more darker. Saturation doesn't really do much with the scale. I just personally just slap it on 1.0. If you want to be fancy, slap it on 1.10. Doesn't really do much difference. But if you want to see more targets, check out this video.